Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning into the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Good. Guess what we're going to talk about today?
Foreign
policy.
Yes.
Very important issue.
Yeah.
Highly neglected by the mainstream media.
That's true.
And of course, having a balance of what we're supposed to do around the world and defend this country, there should be a balance. And we work from the assumption that it's way out of balance. We neglect our own country and protection of our liberties, and we're doing so much overseas, protecting our freedoms and our Constitution. I think it's a mixed bag. So we're going to talk about that issue in a different context, but in a subject we've visited before. I'm going to start by reading a headline from antiwar.com from this morning, because they keep up on this, and they've done that for a long time. And there's a lot of good leads on that website. Mm-hmm. But this headline says, McMaster, and they quote, U.S. prepared to denuclearize North Korea by force. Well, I was waiting for the proof that they have a nuke. I don't want them to have a nuke. I'd like a lot less people to have nukes, but when you look at it, we find out that if they have nukes, we're less likely to mess around with them. It's when they get rid of them, and we know it, then we get more aggressive. So right away, I just wonder whether they really have nuclear power that they retaliate with, even though they have a lot of conventional weapons they could retaliate if we get them messing around. But quite frankly, I haven't been convinced that they have a nuclear arsenal. I am not convinced that they have an intercontinental missile like it was announced by the media the other day. They can reach the United States now. This is a lot of hype, but once again, we're dealing with flip-flop. Where is he coming from now? And this implies, us, committing the first strike.
Yeah.
And I looked at that national security strategy the other day, and they didn't put in there that like Bush had. We believe in the first strike. A preventive war. And I think you made a comment to me at least and said, yeah, but when they don't put it in, that doesn't mean they won't do it. So I think this sort of suggests a first strike, and I don't think this is going to help us in any way to bring more peace to the world. I just don't think that even some of our advisors in the administration, some of our generals say, maybe we're overreacting on this.
Yeah, and I think even within the administration, this is not going to surprise anyone. There seem to be two points of view on North Korea, because Secretary of Defense Mattis said that he doesn't believe North Korea is, quote, a capable threat to the United States. He sounds a little skeptical as to whether they have a nuclear weapon and the ability to deliver it. So there seems to be a conflict there. But, this was McMaster, the National Security Advisor for President Trump. And he was giving a press conference yesterday, and the BBC asked him, are you committed to a peaceful resolution of the North Korea situation? He said, well, of course, that's what we want, but we're not committed to a peaceful resolution. We're committed to a resolution. We have to be prepared to compel the denuclearization of North Korea without the cooperation of that regime. That seems pretty clear, saying that we are ready to strike North Korea and take away their nukes. Even
when the Soviet Empire existed, I remember somebody explaining to me that because the Soviets say we're for peace on their terms, so we're for peace on our terms.
Yeah.
And anything that's to our benefit, and sometimes our benefit has nothing to do with the American people or their pocketbooks or their liberties. It has to do with American national security interests, which means usually the military-industrial complex, and of course that is an outrage what goes on there and how powerful they are and how influential they are, and no matter what kind of problems we have, it seems like the bipartisan support for that spending is endless. So there's never any question on this policy that causes confrontation. Where's the coalition right now to say, why don't we tone this down a little bit? From all wings of the political spectrum, like there used to be some progressive Democrats would say, hey, calm down a little bit. Why are you so insecure, or are you pretending? And but the history shows that even even if you do go in and you get promises, you know, and they open up their doors like Saddam Hussein did and Gaddafi, it led to a disaster for them. So who looks like a crazy man, and he's doesn't look like he'd be my best friend, but he may be more rational than a lot of people realize, that he's reacting in a geopolitical sense, that he's doing what is best in his estimation for his country. And as goofy as he is, he must still have a lot of support there. There's a lot of people there. You know, if 99% of the people thought he was crazy like Americans think he wouldn't exist, you know. So he's gotten away with this. So this is a problem that will be resolved. So I don't think we help solve the problem.
Well, as a matter of fact, he has a big ally in helping keeping him popular in North Korea, and that's the U.S. Because the more we put sanctions on the average people, the more he can blame the United States for all their misery, and it props him up. He's the savior. But you know, something else that McMaster said at this press conference that really struck me, and it really was reminiscent of the Iraq War lead-up. He said, quote, "We're out of time with this problem." You know, and how many years since 1950, since the Korean War, have we dealt with this problem? And now all of a sudden, we're out of time with this problem.
Well, don't you feel good about the fact that maybe they will calm down, because they would consult with our ally that's most involved in this, the South Koreans? So maybe the South Koreans will bring a little calming to our aggressive talk. Do you think that's likely to happen?
I think it really is an interesting wild card, because, you know, the South Koreans elected a new president. This president is much less hawkish than his predecessor, Moon Jae-in, and he said in August, he said, quote, "Any military action to be taken on the Korean Peninsula requires South Korean consent."
Yeah, but the big question is we might hear that, which is sensible. The big question is, what are the odds of us listening to his advice? That's where we run into a problem.
It would be interesting. How far is the U.S. willing to go against its ally South Korea in striking North Korea? You know, President Moon referenced the 1953 U.S.-South Korea Defense Treaty, and he says there's a firm agreement between South Korea and the U.S. The people can be assured there will be no war, is what he said in August too.
You know, I don't think we would have to drop a nuke or even a small one on North Korea to let the bombs fly. And it might not take that much. I mean, how many troops would have to go in to precipitate the conflict? How many bombs has to fall, or how many special forces have to go in? But if you send in the special forces and all of a sudden they blow up a couple places and even kill the president, I don't think that's all of a sudden, you know, we killed the head of state, you know, and it'll the threat will disappear. Yeah. That is where all the risk is, and they do talk about that. Some of the generals, you know, saying, do you realize that this could be a very dangerous thing? But even the conversation just prevents any movement. You know, we were hopeful when we heard some common sense coming from the administration, said, well, we ought to at least, you know, talk to them without conditions. And then Trump squelched that within a day or two. He just said, no, the position is we will talk to them on our terms.
You know, a lot of the right-wing critics, or however you describe them, the hawkish critics of Obama, who now embrace Trump, say Obama just wanted to lead from behind. You know, that's all he ever did, lead from behind. We are leading from the front. But the reality is that the U.S.'s increasing bellicosity has rendered it irrelevant in many situations. Look at Syria. The U.S. provided no solution whatsoever. In fact, was part of the problem. It created the problem with the Assad must go policy, with arming jihadists and terrorists. And when it came time to calm down the situation, the U.S. was simply not part of the picture. And I think the U.S., those people who think we should lead, are risking putting us into another situation, which I think would be a good one, where we are simply irrelevant to the situation there. Now, here's the South Korean president. They just had big war games with the U.S. again, where they practiced overthrowing the North Korean government. But the South Korean president said just yesterday that he's willing to look at cutting back on military exercises with the U.S. to try to calm things down before the Olympics, try to reassure North Korea. So he's clearly, I think, with this statement, looking for a way out of these increasingly hyped up military exercises that are leading us toward war.
You know, when the Cold War ended, there were negotiations and talk on what would happen to the Soviet missiles, and they were denuclearized in a sense where they would back off and they wouldn't occupy so many countries with nuclear weapons. And they've made a suggestion just recently, and they said, why don't we denuclearize Europe? You know, why don't we start with bringing the nukes home from Europe? And if somebody feels very, you know, concerned and threatened, you know, let the Europeans decide. But they're us. We're over there. And but this strikes, you know, most people in the United States as, you know, being absurd. Why would you do that? Because the Soviets, you know, they still think of the Russians as the Soviets.
Yeah.
You know that they are a great threat, and that's where I think they're wrong. But when you suggest that we should treat them like we expect them to treat us, just think that we weren't very happy. And I remember it well is when Khrushchev put missiles in Cuba.
Yeah.
You know, and it made it a lot easier for them to hit us from there. That was a big issue. We don't want anybody on our doorstep, but we think that they are supposed to roll over and do whatever we tell them and move right up to their borders and for them to accept the fact, oh, we're spreading our goodness and democracy, and this is all for peace.
Well, you know, we're unsure that North Korea has the capacity to threaten the United States. We do know that Russia has the capacity to destroy the United States. So in that sense, they are a threat, a potential threat. So that would argue all the more for what you're saying. Why are we provoking them? Why are we not looking for a way around this? Even in the height of the Cold War with détente and other things, we looked for solutions. So they are a potential threat. So why are we provoking them? What's the point?
Well, obviously there isn't a point, but it boils down that this is how people consider what they're doing as logical, because they start from the premise that we have a moral obligation to be the policeman of the world, and that we are an exceptional nation. I still hear this constantly on TV, that thrown out this accusation: if you're not going along with us, you are so un-American, you are so unpatriotic. And this is, they build that into it, and this goes back to the war propagandists and the military-industrial complex and the deep state, and they want to control people, what they're thinking, and they really win so often on this. So it isn't easy to argue common sense and say, well, you know, why don't we just, you know, do what we expect others to do? No, we're more threatened than they are. But the one thing I've said so many times that really annoys me is that we drop bombs, kill a lot of people, and our military personnel suffer, and it's always because national security interests to protect our Constitution and protect our liberties. Can you think of any other, you know, unbelievable justification for our foreign policy? I don't know how people can buy into that.
Yeah, it's relentless propaganda, I guess. But, you know, you mentioned early on the new national security strategy, and it ties in with what we're saying, because it does mention North Korea as a great threat, one of the greatest threats. But there was an interesting piece I saw earlier today on the new national security strategy and how it's the same old 1992 Wolfowitz Doctrine all over again. And here are the central components of the Wolfowitz Doctrine. Prevent the reemergence of a new rival. The U.S. would act militarily anywhere in the world to protect its strategic interests. On the Middle East, we must remain the dominant outside power. In Europe, the U.S. will use NATO as a channel for its influence and focus on the Russian threat. This is 1992. The new Trump strategy is exactly the same as it's been since 1992.
But in that way, they sort of deflect from our argument. They're not consistent. But it looks like
That's true.
it looks like the neocons are consistently winning.
Yeah.
I mean, we might hear the rhetoric because even both parties play it up. You know, they campaign closer to our position. I mean, whether it's Bush or Obama.
Yeah.
You know, they sound better.
Yeah.
And Trump sounds better.
Sounded better,
But,
yeah.
So you don't know whether, well, when if they get behind the scenes, the Republicans and Democrats, and sort of chuckle, we're going to fool them again. You know, no, neither one of us are going to win, but we're going to have the same foreign policy. And that is what happened. That's too bad.
Well, a final quip would be Paul Craig Roberts, who's often spot on these things, and he said in a recent column, Trump says one of the main legs of his strategy is peace through strength. What peace? What peace have we had in the last 17 years?
Yeah, and I'd like to, and I've tried to modify that statement about peace through strength, because strength means military intimidation. And I'd like to say peace through common sense, and that's what we need sometimes, because I've always been pleased when an individual would come up and they've been sort of looking into non-interventionism and Austrian economics, and they'll say, well, you know, I understand it. He says, the more I hear about this, somebody will say, it just is common sense. And I'd like to think it is common sense. I'd like to think that, you know, enjoying the benefits of personal liberty and responsibility, and the benefits economically, as well as the benefits of peace, is something that can be achieved through common sense. It doesn't have to be that complex. And of course, understanding and believing in the non-aggression principle of libertarianism is a good way to start. We don't have a right to force other people into doing things that they don't want to do if they're not hurting anybody. So it's non-aggression that if everybody adopted that, we'd have absolutely, you know, a perfect world, which we're not going to get. But we need to move in that direction, which would be quite a bit different if we're moving into the directions of a non-aggression principle to one of military confrontation and force. They will do this or we're going to bomb you. That's a different story. So we will continue to work on this effort to move people toward a more peaceful resolution, and expect from that, because of common sense, that there is a chance then that we would have peace and prosperity. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.